welcome to the debate. There is a famous Steve Jobs quote that really frames the material we are reviewing today. He said, "You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward." And I believe when we look at the landscape of Malaysian urban development, we are finally standing at that exact vantage point. The picture is actually becoming clear.
It is a very poetic way to start. And frankly, a very convenient quote for city planners who, might be trying to justify decades of somewhat disjointed projects. But if we are being honest about the landscape we are looking at today, a lot of those dots are still just floating in empty space. They are waiting for a line that hasn't been drawn yet.
Well, that is exactly what we are dissecting today. We're looking at the concept of the smart city, specifically within the Malaysian context, through the lens of a presentation called Connecting the Dots for Smart Cities by Dr. Mazlan Abbas, the CEO of Favoriot. The core question we are tackling is this: is a city just a machine, a collection of cold hardware and concrete? Or is it, as the source material quite boldly suggests, a living, breathing organism?
Right, and I will be arguing that while the whole city as an organism metaphor is beautiful on a slide deck, it is currently a utopian dream. It masks a very messy reality. When I look at the source material, I see data silos, bureaucratic hurdles, and a massive, massive gap between having a smart city blueprint and actually operating a smart city. So I see a machine that is still very much under construction and perhaps missing a few essential gears.
And I am taking the position that this anatomy metaphor, where we view the command center as the brain, the sensors as nerves, the infrastructure as the skeleton, is not just marketing fluff. It is a necessary operational model. It is prescriptive, driven by integrated IoT platforms and the very clear roadmap set out by the Malaysia Smart City Framework. We are literally witnessing the birth of a living entity.
Well, let's see if this patient has a pulse, or if we are just looking at a very expensive mannequin.
Fair enough. Let's start with the vision itself, because, you have to understand the blueprint to understand the building. Dr. Mazlan's presentation lays out this 10-point analogy between human anatomy and smart cities. I find this comparison incredibly robust. It moves us away from thinking about tech as just like buying a new laptop and towards systems, like maintaining a body.
Yeah, I have reviewed the 10 points. It compares the skeleton to infrastructure, the skin to the environment, the nerves to sensors. It is neat. It is elegant. But let's apply some actual pressure to it.
Please do.
Let's take the nervous system. In the human body, the nerves, the spinal cord, the brain, they're integrated from birth. They inherently speak the exact same language. If I touch a hot stove, my hand pulls back before I even consciously register the pain, right? That is a low latency, fully integrated loop. In the context of a Malaysia's smart city, as described in the very pain point section of our material, we just don't have that. We have, and I quote, data in silos. We have different dashboards for every single agency. If the city is a body, it is a body where the left hand doesn't know the right hand is on fire.
I think you are confusing the current state of development with the validity of the architecture itself.
How so?
Well, the material explicitly acknowledges those pain points. That is exactly why the nervous system analogy is prescriptive. It is telling us how to build, not just describing what is there. The sensors, the IoT devices, they are the nerves. But for them to work, you need the spinal cord. In the source material, this is the IoT middleware.
The middleware. The translator.
Exactly, the translator. The source highlights platforms like Favoriot as this connective tissue. This is the spinal cord that aggregates data from dozens of different sensors from different vendors and sends it to the brain. Without it, you are right, you have disjointed spasms. But with it, you have coordination. And we are seeing this infrastructure being laid down. This isn't hypothetical anymore.
But that brings us directly to the skeleton, the infrastructure itself. The source mentions that 105 members are part of the Malaysia Smart Cities Alliance, the MSCA. Now, that sounds like a strong skeleton. But when I look at the smart city maturity journey outlined in the text, I genuinely get worried. Level 1 is Smart City Early Adopter. Do you know what qualifies a city for Level 1?
Preparing a smart city action plan.
Right. writing a PDF. That is administrative work. It is not functional. You don't get to level 4, visionary smart city, until you are complying with 85 different indicators under the MS ISO 37122 standard. That is a massive, massive leap. My concern here is that we are celebrating the skeleton, the plans, the committees, the alliances, while the actual functional organs are still sitting in jars on the shelf.
I mean, I think that is a deeply cynical reading of how urban development works. You don't build a skyscraper or a body overnight. You have to start with the blueprint. And the material shows that 6 states, Penang, Selangor, the Federal Territories, Sarawak, Sabah, and Johor, have completed their blueprints. That is roughly 43% of the country. That isn't just writing a PDF. That is half the nation agreeing on the basic genetic code for their cities.
Agreeing on the code and actually expressing the genes are two very different things in practice. Let's look at the brain of this organism, the command center. The source material draws a direct parallel here. The brain processes signals and initiates action. In a city, this is supposed to be the central management system, the single customized dashboard.
Yes, and this is where the true efficiency comes from. Instead of a traffic cop guessing where the congestion is, the brain sees the data from the nerves, the cameras, the road sensors, and reroutes traffic automatically. It is a pure stimulus response loop.
In theory. But the source material also lists vendor lock-in as a major persistent hurdle. This is critical. If your traffic cameras are made by company A and your smart traffic lights are managed by company B, and they use proprietary software that absolutely refuses to talk to the central dashboard, you don't have a brain. You essentially have a lobotomy. You have information coming in that simply cannot be acted upon.
Which is precisely why the material emphasizes open APIs and standardization. The shift isn't just about buying more technology, it is about shifting the foundational philosophy. The endocrine system analogy in the text is actually fascinating here. In the human body, hormones signal across completely different organs to coordinate complex changes, like adrenaline preparing the whole body for a threat.
And in the city, what is the adrenaline?
In the city, data flow and alerts act as those hormones. When a natural disaster hits, let's look at the Transcend project in Sarawak that is mentioned in the slides. That system coordinates weather data, emergency response teams, and public alerts. That is the endocrine system, flushing the city with data to trigger a coordinated, multi-agency response. That isn't a theoretical paper. That is a project in Sarawak, right now, actively mitigating disasters.
Okay, I will grant you that disaster management, what the slides call the immune system, tends to be the most advanced because, well, the stakes are life and death. When a flood happens, people are forced to cooperate. But let's look at everyday operations. Let's look at the digestive system, waste management.
Sure.
The source says smart bins optimize collection. That sounds great on a slide. The bin is full, it tells the truck to come. But look at the reality of municipal councils. The garbage trucks are often contracted out to third parties. The drivers might not have the integrated tablets. The union contracts might dictate fixed routes regardless of what the smart bin says.
Now you are arguing politics and policy, not technology.
In a city, politics is the operating system. You simply cannot separate the biology from the psychology here. The source material explicitly lists siloed data as a core pain point. That isn't usually a technical problem. It is a territorial one. The Department of Sanitation doesn't want the Department of Finance knowing exactly how inefficient their routes are. A smart city requires a level of transparency that human bureaucracy naturally resists.
But the technology forces that transparency. That is the entire beauty of the city as organism model. Once you install the platform, once you have that Favoriot middleware aggregating the data at the protocol level, the inefficiencies become starkly visible on the dashboard. You can't hide them in a filing cabinet anymore. The brain sees the infection.
Or the body rejects the transplant.
I just don't think the evidence in the material supports that rejection theory. Look at the revenue growth projected. Smart City IoT revenue is projected to hit over $4.6 billion by 2029. That is a tidal wave of investment. You have automotive IoT, healthcare IoT, smart finance. The capital is flowing. This isn't a rejected transplant. It is a massive growth spurt.
Money flowing in doesn't automatically equal intelligence emerging.
It often just means we are buying very expensive toys. I want to go back to that maturity journey chart because I think it is the absolute crux of our debate. Level 2 is implementing some initiatives. Level 3 is comprehensive data integration, interagency integration. That jump from level 2 to level 3 is the valley of death.
Why do you call it the Valley of Death?
Because level 2 is easy. You buy some smart streetlights. You install 100 CCTV cameras. You hold a press conference and point to them and say, look, we are a smart city. But the streetlights do not talk to the CCTV, and neither of them talks to the police dispatch. Level 3 requires actual integration. It requires the nerves to physically and logically connect to the brain. And looking at the map of Malaysia and the source, with 6 states still in the initial stage and 2 in preparation, I argue we are largely stuck at levels 1 and 2. We are building a collection of gadgets, not an organism.
I think you are underestimating the velocity of this change. Yes, you mentioned the states in the initial stage, but look at what is actively happening in the leading states. In Penang, we have the Integrated Enforcement System, the SPKB. That is a level 3 type system. It actively integrates enforcement data. In Cyberjaya, they are rolling out smart poles and 360 applications.
Smart poles. I see smart poles listed in almost every smart city pitch I read. It is the classic example. It is a pole with a camera, a LED light, and maybe a 5G router strapped to it. It is hardware. It is a bone. It is not intelligence.
It is the infrastructure of intelligence. You can't have a thought without a neuron. These smart poles in Cyberjaya, or the LoRaWAN networks being deployed, these are the physical manifestations of the nervous system. The source material emphasizes connectivity as the absolute foundation. You can't connect the dots if you don't actually lay down the dots first.
Fair enough, we are deploying the dots. But let's talk about the dots themselves. The source material lists a whole ecosystem of applications. 12,321 applications developed on the Favriot platform. That sounds incredibly impressive, but what are they really? Are they city-altering efficiency-driving algorithms, or are they 10,000 student hobbyist projects checking the humidity of a fern in a dorm room?
That is a remarkably dismissive way to view an open innovation ecosystem. The source specifically mentions Generation IoT. It highlights deep engagement with universities, UTM, UTHM, UITM. This is about building the human capital, the white blood cells, if you will, who actually understand this technology. You don't just buy a smart city from a foreign vendor. You have to grow it from your own population. The fact that there are over 12,000 apps suggests a highly vibrant ground-up adoption of the protocol.
Ground up is good. I am not denying that. But a city is ultimately managed top-down. And this is where the governance dot comes into play. The MSCA, the Malaysia Smart Cities Alliance. The material lists good governance and political stability as key success factors. My ultimate question is the MSCA powerful enough to actually break those departmental silos?
Well, the MSCA brings together the government through KPKT, the private sector like Sunway and TM, and the technology providers. It is a 105-member strategic platform. This is the frontal cortex of the Malaysian Smart City Initiative. It is where the executive decisions and standards are aligned. Without this alliance, you would be right, it would be total chaos. But the existence of this body proves that there is a central coordinated will.
A committee is not a cortex. A committee is often a place where good ideas go to die a very slow death by meeting minutes. I want to focus on the standards aspect you just mentioned, MSO ISO 37122. The source says this is the roadmap, but have you looked closely at what those specific indicators require? Energy derived from waste, real-time public transport data coverage, online voting.
Energy derived from waste is a perfect example of the metabolism of a smart city, the digestive system actually functioning.
Yes, it is. But how many Malaysian cities are actually doing that at scale right now? The gap between the aspiration of ISO 37122 and the reality of an overflowing landfill in a secondary town is enormous. By setting the bar at biological organism, are we setting these municipal councils up for failure? Maybe we should just aim for efficient machine first?
If you aim for a machine, you get a machine, rigid, brittle, unable to adapt to new inputs. The organism metaphor matters precisely because organisms adapt.
The source material discusses prescriptive analytics. This goes way beyond just seeing what happened, which is descriptive, or why it happened, diagnostic. It is about the system suggesting what to do next.
Walk me through that. Give me a concrete example.
Okay, take the respiratory system air quality. In a machine model, a sensor says, air quality is bad. A red light blinks on a dashboard. A human operator eventually sees it, maybe finishes their coffee, and sends out an email alert. In the organism model, the visionary smart city, the sensor detects the drop in air quality. The brain, utilizing AI, analyzes the real-time traffic patterns causing it. The nerves then automatically adjust the traffic lights to divert cars away from that specific zone. The lungs breathe easier. No human committee meeting required. That is the goal of prescriptive analytics.
That is a beautiful dream. But let's look at the actual technical hurdle to that specific example. To do that, the air quality sensor, managed by the Department of Environment, needs to trigger the traffic lights managed by the local council, which might then need to alert the public transport system managed by RapidKL. We go right back to the IoT middleware solution. The source argues Favioria can just do this. Get started in days and not months. Integrate with legacy systems.
And why do you doubt that capability? It's software.
Because legacy systems are the literal cholesterol of the smart city. Old databases, paper records, proprietary servers sitting in basements since 1999. The idea that you can just slap a modern middleware API on top of 30 years of bureaucratic accumulation and get started in days feels incredibly, dangerously optimistic. It is like trying to run a marathon when your arteries are 90% blocked.
But the technology is the bypass surgery. The source explicitly states that the platform handles protocol aggregation, MQTT, HTTP, CoAP. It speaks the languages of the old systems and the new sensors. You don't have to rip out the old pipes immediately. You just need a smarter valve to pull the data. And the Generation IoT initiative creates the digital surgeons who know exactly how to install those valves.
I noticed the source also highlights the concept of a smart community. It lists smart payment, smart waste, smart health, but it also lists, rather specifically, the smart manhole.
It's a crucial piece of urban infrastructure.
It is, but it perfectly highlights the granularity and scale of the problem. A city has hundreds of thousands of manholes. To make this city a true organism, every single one of them needs a functioning sensor. The scale of the nervous system required is astronomical. The cost of maintenance alone, just sending crews out to change the batteries on 10,000 manhole sensors, is a logistical nightmare that the anatomy metaphor completely glosses over. A human body repairs itself. A smart city needs a massive municipal budget for battery replacement.
Actually, low-power WAN technologies and energy harvesting, which are technologies heavily referenced in the broader scope of IoT deployments, are solving that exact issue. But honestly, you are missing the forest for the manholes here. The value isn't just in the physical sensor, it is in the data. The data stream is the blood. The source shows the revenue potential. If that single manhole sensor prevents one catastrophic flash flood by detecting a blockage early, it pays for itself 10 times over. The immune system value proposition is simply undeniable.
I agree on the value proposition. I really do. I disagree on the timeline. The Steve Jobs quote you used at the start says, "We connect dots looking backward." I think we are still very much in the phase of just scattering dots on the floor. Look at the Smart City Framework timeline in the slides. It started with the Multimedia Super Corridor back in 1996, then the Smart City Framework in 2019, now the ISO standards in 2021. That is over 25 years, and we are still talking about establishing committees for half the country. The evolution of this organism is glacial.
Evolution is slow until it suddenly isn't. The Cambrian explosion happens when the environmental conditions are exactly right. And I argue the conditions are right now. We finally have the connectivity with 5G and NB-IoT. We have the standards with the ISO framework. We have the platform with middleware like Favrio, and we have the political will centralized in the MSCA. The dots are no longer just scattered, they are actively being drawn into lines.
I see lines being drawn, yes, but I don't see a coherent picture yet. I see a patchwork, a smart intersection over here, a flood sensor over there, a
a parking payment app there. But does the payment app talk to the flood sensor? No. Until we genuinely solve the level 3 integration challenge, until the blood flows freely between the organs without hitting a bureaucratic clot, we do not have an organism. We have Frankenstein's monster. It is a collection of disparate parts stitched together, just waiting for lightning to strike.
I much prefer the term embryonic. It is developing the key success factors listed in the presentation. The infrastructure, the digital economy, the environment, those are the nutrients. And the snapshot showing nearly 43% of states with finalized blueprints is proof of viability. The heart is starting to beat, even if the limbs are still growing.
We might just have to agree to disagree on the patient's overall condition. I look at the scans and see a skeleton. You look at them and see a baby.
I see the inevitable future. And critically, the source material gives us the actual manual on how to nurture it. It doesn't just offer empty platitudes like be smart. It provides the anatomy. Build the brain through the command center, connect the nerves with scalable sensors, and ensure the immune system, the cybersecurity, is always active.
And of course, remember to pay the monthly software bill for the middleware.
Efficiency pays for itself in the end.
Well, that brings us to the end of our examination today. We have looked deeply at the anatomy, the nerves, the brain, and the very real, sometimes painful growing pains of the Malaysian smart city.
The dots are undeniably there. The smart poles in Cyberjaya, the integrated enforcement in Penang, the predictive disaster management in Sarawak, these are not hallucinations. They are hardware and code actively running today.
But the picture they ultimately form is still very much up for interpretation. It is up to you, the listener, to look at your own city. Look at the new smart streetlight on your corner. Look at the pothole reporting app on your phone. And ask yourself, is this actually connected to a central brain that acts? Or is it just an isolated gadget designed to make a local council look modern?
Is your city a collection of rusting, siloed parts? Or is it a living, breathing organism evolving to serve you better? That is the question we leave you with.
Thank you for joining us for this discussion.
Goodbye.